I am in Kyrgyzstan, which of course used to lay at the centre of the Silk Road. But there's already a lot of information already online about the Silk Road, so I decided to share some of the strange things that made their way across. But first of all, to give you a general idea of what was traded, in the 16th century an English explorer named Anthony Jenkinson gave a detailed report of a market, and he said that the Indians, they traded wine, probably they traded that with the Portuguese earlier on. The Persians brought things like linen and wool, the Russians brought saddles and sheepskin, and the locals brought slaves. First of all, there's the three hares. Now these were a symbol created in Western China around the 6th century, probably by the Buddhists, and from there it spread westwards. For instance, in the 13th century, the Persian coins feature the three hares, and later on it can be found in synagogues and churches in Europe, most of which are in England. Plus, there's a small glass bead that's been found in Japan, which dates back to around the 5th century, and it's believed that this was created in Europe. Now, it's no huge surprise that glass was traded eastwards, as it was actually pretty highly prized. But how it found its way to Japan remains a bit of a mystery. But also, if you were to include maritime trade, which a lot of historians seem to do, you can include some of the strange animals that found their way from west to east. For instance, there's Indian rhinos found in Renaissance Europe. There's also mosaics of parrots in ancient Rome, although they could be African, not Asian. And there's artwork depicting giraffes in China. More recently, in the 14th century, there's the Fonthill vase. Now, this first arrived in Hungary before travelling to the court of Naples and to the Pope, and eventually found its way to Ireland. Now, this was the first piece of Chinese porcelain that's made its way to Europe, and it of course inspired a great deal of artists to try and emulate it. But it wasn't the only thing, well, only Asian thing, to help inspire European artists. If you look at the artwork of somebody like Giotto, he incorporated Mongol text into his art. Now, it's meaningless that he didn't bother to learn the language, but what he probably did was got inspired from Mongol paper currency that moved westwards. Plus, if you look at some artwork in the 14th century, they actually include Mongols in some very strange places, like the crucifixion of Jesus, for instance. But finally, onto the Vikings. Now, in the 1950s in Sweden, a Buddha statue was discovered which dates back to the age of the Vikings, and it was probably created in India. Now, this has been the source of a great deal of speculation and theory, but the Vikings did trade quite a bit with Asia. After all, if you look at the Osenberg ship, a Viking ship, a lot of Persian silk was discovered in that. Plus, there's the Ulfbert sword, which was discovered in Sweden, and according to a historian at Stockholm University, was created in Persia. And if you're interested about how the Vikings may have got a hold of these goods, it may not be as difficult as you might think. After all, Ingvar the Far travelled, a Viking, made it as far south as the Caucasus, and around the 11th century, the Vikings launched campaigns into the Caucasus and Persia via the Caspian Sea.